All right, so just to nip any questions in the bud on YouTube, if you're watching this, my font is Fear of Code. My theme is called Contrast Theme. And I'm John Lindquist. I started Egghead, and I'm going to talk about RxJS and React put together. I really liked Andre's methods of throwing values and functions up into the heavens. I may throw properties down to hell and see what happens. Otherwise, my talk may just go to hell, and we'll see. All right, so just kind of as an intro to React, if you've never seen React before, this is the hello world of React. And the font on the right is Avenir. So this is React. You see H1 tags and a query selector, and you render it out. So now you all know React. You can go and charge more at your job. Say, hey, I know another framework. That's double my salary. So from here, so weird side note, I've done live coding for every single talk I've ever done, and I actually pre-recorded these, so you'll see them go really fast and accurate. But for some reason, I'm more nervous showing pre-recorded videos than actually live coding. My whole life has been live coding, so I'll walk you through these as they go by. So right now, I'm extracting that H1 into a, what is that? Is that a getter or a setter? I can't remember. So I'm extracting it into a function called hello world, and then I'm going to drop that function down into the render and use that as tags. This is called JSX. Underneath the hood, that compiles down to something called React create element. Doesn't really matter. Just know that that function is now going to return hello. So I change it to hi, it re-renders, I can just close the tag. And now I'm going to start writing my first property. You've used properties on HTML forever, you use them in your Angular apps, you use them everywhere. And this is how you write a property. Just write the property and set it. All right? So the greeting is now bonjour, and I'm going to pass that in to that function that now represents my DOM, my tags, my elements, whatever you want to call it, my JSX. And that is going to come into the function, and that is going to be, I'm going to name it props. You can name it whatever you want. The common pattern is to name it props. Then I can pass that into that JSX and put it inside of single curly braces, not double curly braces. When you get to React from Angular, if you ever want to make that journey, just remember one less when you're doing the shift and then way over on the right side of the keyboard, press it one less time because it's single curly braces. And now I have a component that takes props that renders out a greeting. So there's props.greeting, which is set down on my component that's being rendered. Now, because my talk is about streams and pipes and pipables, I actually made a little animation here that follows my mouse as I drag it around. So if I want to show how this goes from here, I have a little Mario pipe. So that greeting is going to come into here and then be rendered right out there. And then it's not going to go anywhere else, but it's fun to play with that. All right, so that, now you know even more about React, so now you can charge more. But the pattern I want to show, as you can see, I'm opening up that JSX. I'm opening it up for more options underneath it. The transclusion, the content projection, whatever you want to call it, I'm giving my component some children to play with. The cool thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to put in a function. So I pasted that down in there. I pasted that exact same code. So if I rewind, which I've never been able to do in a talk before, All right. So if I go from here and I copy and paste, is everyone a good copy and paster here? Yeah, good copy and pasters, not in the back? It's Command C, Command V. It's really useful. It's the first thing I teach new students. All right, and then copy and paste that down into here, down below. So you can see what used to be here is now inside of there. And it's inside of that single curly. All right. And then now props has a special property on it in React called children. So now, since I'm passing a function inside of there, I can invoke it, and I can pass the rest of my props into it. This is a very common pattern in React as far as setting a controller, a container. There's people name it all sorts of things. But just the idea that I have a component that has a function inside of it, and that function is going to be controlled by its parents. So you have this passing things down through the props, and I can do whatever I want inside of there. Now my problem with this comes from, I made the mistake of signing up to do a Vue.js and RxJS talk at Conf, and exploring the patterns inside of Vue. And I've played with RxJS in Angular as well, and exploring the patterns there. As soon as I used the pre-existing libraries, it always felt like something was missing, that there should be easier ways to access observables and templates. Have you felt the same way with Angular, that I want to use this observable inside of a template? And I want to show that this, like right now, this cannot be asynchronous. I cannot delay that or add any sort of logic to it at all. So that's what, when after I got home from my Vue talk, I dove into writing a Vue streams library. And then preparing this talk, I accidentally wrote a React library. Yeah, so that was a big mistake. All right. So this is the exact same thing. You can see the imports on this one. That's the only difference. Because now I'm going to bring in this library that I put together, which I named React Streams. And I'm going to bring something in off of React Streams that's going to enable this streaming capability inside of React. I named it pipe props because of the new pipeable in RxJS features. And I'm going to take that, delete that function, and I'm just going to say, you know what? Pipe those props. Throw those props down to hell. See what happens. Who knows what's going to happen in there, right? And if I let it run and refresh the page, it just stayed at hello. It does the exact same thing it did before. Took the props, passed them down the children, rendered the function. There is nothing different. It's just that now I can pass in operators. So this is going to be very fancy. I'm going to import an RxJS operator called delay, and one called start with. Now this is going to be the coolest component you've ever seen, because it's going to wait 3 seconds before it renders, and it's going to start with the greeting of wait. Now if you're familiar with RxJS and React, you're like, wow, that's, if you think of the amount of code you would have to write to achieve that. If you think of all the state management, getting the property in, setting a timeout, changing that into something that you could render out, starting with a certain property, and think of, if you've worked with React, think of what that would take and compare it to this. And now I have a component that says wait, and this is playing at 3 times speed, so that was 3 seconds. If you want to see what 3 seconds looks like in 3 times speed, it's that. Yeah. So now we have wait and hello. The component starts with wait, waits 3 seconds, and then goes to hello. All right. Now that should, if you're experienced with RxJS and React, you're like, wow, now I have the whole world of RxJS, asynchronous, all these AJAX, all these sorts of behaviors available to me. All right, so I'm going to show creating an AJAX-based component. This is going to load some data off of that URL at the top. That URL has a Star Wars API, and if you target certain IDs on there, it gives you back data based on the character it finds. So we're going to go ahead, and on the props, so if you look at this, where's my mouse? If you look at this inside, this is the same thing as it was before. It's a function that just returns that, and you can extract that into a component if you want to. But right now, this is the same as it was, but instead of hello, it's saying Star Wars, and it's hard-coded right now. So I'm going to pass in a property of URL. I'm going to give it that URL. I'm going to pass in a property type called people. I'm going to pass in a property called ID and give it 0. Now that changes nothing, but what I can do, anyone used the switch map operator before? You're familiar with streaming in some properties? You're like, wait a second, this needs to be a different observable. Because I want to load data, I want to take URL type and ID and pass it off to a request. So it's going to switch map, grab the URL type and ID, make an AJAX call based on that, the string concatenation using the template strings. And then, nothing's happening yet, but I pipe that into a map where I grab the response, and then I just map person to the response. And now I have a component that is going to request data, grab a response, and give me a person and a URL back to play with. So now I can essentially copy and paste that, what's mapped right here. You'll always map the props you want to pass down to the children, and right now I want to pass down a person and a URL. So I'm going to pass down the person. I'm going to render out the person.name. Reformatting on save changes your code a lot, but that's the same thing, don't worry. And now the person.name is Yoda. They'd reached out into a server, grabbed the name, or grabbed an object of Yoda, and found person.name was Yoda. Then I can also make an image tag and pass in that URL I passed down as well, because the images are hosted at the root of the server, and create that string that says, at that URL, grab me that image, and also give me the alt text of the person.name. Now what I have is a completely reusable component where if I were to take Star Wars, use it anywhere in my application, it could render out whatever you passed in here. You could pass in a contact card, you could pass in a dashboard, you could pass in a profiles, a tweet, a post, whatever you want. My Star Wars is just going to say, here you go, have a person and URL that's based on that's on a server somewhere. So that's switching on the properties and going to get that call. All right. It was actually, I wasted a lot of time in my presentation building a video player that I could draw on top of. But I also added the feature that if I hit the right key, it loads the next video. I mean, I'm a pretty good developer, I think. But the fun part was I built this video player using this React Streams library. So it was a fun little dog food project, which was built just for this. All right. So now we are at this stage of our component. What if I don't like Yoda? And, well, that's not possible. What if I just want to load another Star Wars character after the beloved Yoda loads in? What I can do now is I can create a button called Load Next. And that button does nothing. but I can switch over from using the switch map on the props and pass in the props as an observable. Just hang with me here for a second. And I'm going to return the props and pipe them into a switch map, which was essentially kind of what was going on before. But now, because Andre actually showed a very similar thing. When you open that up, it gives you the chance to do things inside of that function block. Before, it was doing a direct passing values down. Now I'm opening a block up, which is going to give me a chance to actually define things. So I'm going to define an onClick, and I'm going to use a function called source. And this also comes from the React Streams library. And on source, what I can do with this is I can merge props and my click. So when the props come in or the onClick comes in, I can scan the props and take the ID and add 1 to it. Now, scan is the same thing as, well, not the same thing, but can equate to set state in React. Or scan is the same thing as reducing over an array asynchronously. But the idea is you get the props in. How am I going to change them? Well, I just want the same props, but I want the ID to be incremented by 1. If that word scan scares you, just like I wanted props, but I wanted them with the ID incremented by 1, that's how you write that. And then, so my map is now also going to pass down the handler. And now, when I pass in the handler, add that handler to the button, and I start clicking, it's requesting the other data. Now, this actually puts us in an interesting scenario right here. Because our props, finding videos or finding the right frame of a video is a challenging thing in the video player. Right here puts us in an interesting scenario because our props are streaming in. The props, if some other parent component changed the props of my Star Wars component, then that would also update the props of what gets streamed down. So if a parent component changed the ID or the URL or anything, then things might change inside of my component as well. I'm just going to tell it, you know what, I only want that first value off the props, and then kind of ignore the rest of them. Because from then on, I'm going to handle it with just the onClick. But you could, depending on how you want that to behave, because the props are streaming, you could say, well, maybe I want the first, maybe I want to throttle the props that come in, maybe I want to filter out certain props, kind of a lot of the things that Andre already spoke about. All right, so now with this source idea, what I want to show real quick is this idea is also applicable to Angular. And I want to, for anyone who fell asleep already because it's React, I have a tab open where I do this in Angular. This is the same exact source function. And what this source function is doing in this demo, I'm assigning a field of inc to source, which is mapped to a function x plus 1, and dec to a source, which is mapped to x minus 1. I'm merging those two streams together, so take inc or dec, and then piping them into this scan. So it's going to start with 0, and then it's going to say if I click on inc, then apply that function. If I click on dec, then apply that function. And the beauty of this is I get to put inc directly up into the onClick handler inside of my template. I don't have to worry about saying inc is a new subject. I don't have to worry about any of that strange wiring that you'd have to do before. And I also get that bonus of being able to pipe in operators into my source. Now, does that look more familiar for a lot of you? The fun little thing here is that this, let's see how big I can make this. This source function has essentially what Andre was talking about, where it has a function that has the symbol .observable on it. So now that function matches that contract, kind of like the symbol.iterable or symbol.iterator would match the iteration contract, and you could use that inside of a for loop. Now this function matches the observable contract, and you can use this function, which takes a subject and handles the next and passes in the operators. You can use that as an observable. So if you want to use this inside of Angular, I didn't make a library for it or anything. I think it's kind of weird when people write 5 lines of code and they publish it on NPM and say, hey, everyone, check out my new library. I don't know. That's just me. But if you want to take that and use it on your own Angular projects, that is all it is. All right. Now, if you're completely lost by everything I've said so far, I want to give you some hope. And that is, who's familiar with this page? Who's ever spent countless hours on this page? Now, who can tell me let's pick one. Who can tell me what pull all with would do? But who thinks Lodash is awesome? But who can tell me what pull all with can do? All right? So that's what RxJS is. RxJS is a collection of operators that can work with asynchronous behavior, but you're not going to know what all of them do. There's going to be a pull all with in there. You're like, I don't know what that does. I'm going to have to come across that scenario where my brain is stuck. I have to go look at the docs to find the proper operator to use inside of my stream. Same exact thing with Lodash. I'm stuck in this scenario where I have 2 arrays. I need to see if it exists in the first one, and if it does, I need to find the 10th value in the second one. There's probably a Lodash operator for that. So that's RxJS is this collection of operators. So don't be afraid by all of these functions that I'm using. Just know that it's just like Lodash. You just kind of learn it over time. You hit a scenario with an array, you reach for Lodash, you read the docs. You hit a scenario in RxJS with observables, you go hit the docs and you find that operator. If someday in the future browsers incorporate the observable spec, then RxJS will literally be just a collection of operators, just like Lodash is. They won't have to implement observable anymore. They could just provide operators. All right. So moving on. Again, my font is Vera Code and theme is contrast theme. All right. Right button to the next one. Yeah. All right. Another similar scenario. This is something that's been showed quite a few times as far as why functions as children are such a good idea. And this is a place where toggle, the abstract concept of toggle, can be held. All right. So let's throw the toggle up into the heavens, and then we'll write some props, and then throw those props up to toggle. Right. So from here, I have just some H1s. Let me turn on my pipes. So just some H1s that stringify on and display on or off if on is true. And I'm going to create an input, which is a checkbox. And I'm going to set checked to on. And in here, if I turn on to true or false, it's going to change those values because those values are streaming down from props to props, returned, streamed in, and then streamed down into here. All right, so now I have some space to work with that. I have some space to play with that on inside of the toggle. And I wanted to reiterate the scan behavior in here. I'm going to check a source, and this source is going to take the event.target.checked, and it's going to say on, because checked gives you back true or false on a checkbox. And if that's on, it's going to set on to true. If it's off, or if it's not checked, it's going to set on to false. And then I can merge in props. The props come through first, so it's going to take those first. Or when check comes in later, this would be the same as concatenation, something Andre pointed out to me earlier. The the props can come in, or the clicking check can trigger this next step. The next step being the scan, where I can scan takes the previous props and the next props, or an accumulator and the current, and it decides what to do with it. I'm just going to say, hey, give me those new values every time. But this also gives you the opportunity to compare the previous and the next, to do all sorts of things with what was it before, what's coming through, what should I do based on those situations. You get that chance right here. And that's something you don't get with just regular React components and props. Again, I'm going to return a map. I'm going to return the props. I'm going to return that check handler. Pass down check. On change will be check. And I'll check that button and have it true or false. Now the beauty there is that now inside of here, again, this is the concept of toggle. I can put anything I want inside of here, and anything that has that can take a check and can take on can use it. I could put, again, a delete tweet button or something, or a are you sure you want to cancel button, or anything in there that would take a on or off and a check or a change. And I can just use this concept of toggle throughout my application. And if I wanted to make it a delayed toggle or a validated asynchronous off of a server toggle, or a WebSocket coming in and I want to check the value of some current data that someone just posted on some server elsewhere toggle, I can do all of that now. Like the world is open to me because now I have that step in between that lets me operate on what I have. All righty, next video. All right. So from here, what is the time anyway? 4:32. All right, from here I want to show something. This is a challenge I want to give to you to take home and try and solve. This challenge is the stepper control challenge. So if you have this stepper component, which all it does is it adds one or takes away one. We've kind of gone through this. If you have the ability to customize it on the fly, the ability to change the minimum, the maximum, and the step on the fly, where I can say, well, I want the minimum to now be 8, and now I can't go, or sorry, the minimum is now 10. I can't go below 10 now. And I want the maximum to be 24, and then I need to stop. If you can't hear, I'm clicking. And it's not going above 24. If I want to change the step, then I can go up and down, and I get stopped by the minimum and maximum. And I can do that on the fly inside of this example. Now, I challenge you this weekend or anytime you have some free time to attempt this, to create a stepper, which is a very simple counter plus minus 1, but create it in such a way where you have a dynamic minimum, a dynamic maximum, and a dynamic step. And think about what that solution would look like. Now, with this approach, this stepper component, my app is just piping some props down to update min, update max, update step. And those are all sources. And they're starting with whatever I defined inside of my app. I have a min of 4, a max of 18, a step of 1. Starting values. I could change those starting values, and those would update as well. And then I pass those down so that my app is controlling those minimum and maximums. And then inside of my stepper, the concept of stepping up and down through something, I get to use a fun operator, which you don't get to use much, but it's pretty fun, called merge scan, which allows you to take through the observables the previous and next values and compare them to make sure that there is now a gold thing stuck to my hand. Put that right there. Thank you, Gerard. It allows you to compare them And I can actually do a check on these as they come in. Well, if it's greater than the max, set it to the max. Pretty simple stuff. If it's less than the value, if it's less than the min, set it to the min. Otherwise, give me the value. And it does some check value and default value, and then merges those. It starts with, does that scan we've looked at before, and then maps back those operators and those values through. The cool thing is I could put any component I want inside of this abstraction of step, and I could control it any way that I wanted to. All right, so there's your challenge. I'm not saying it's not possible, but you'll run into some really fun scenarios trying to solve that for yourself. All right, so I just wanted to show these demos that I just showed. They're all available at react-streams.com. That URL is really very tiny, but react-streams.com. You can look at the intro. You can change. That's gonna wait for a real 3 seconds, and you can update this on the fly. It's nice little like in-browser Babel compiling thing, which is pretty fun to play with. So you can update those on the fly. I could update this value so that. See, I told you I was going to throw properties down to help. And each of these are available for you to play with. If I can go up to here without opening the... So this will load Yoda again. Yeah, Yoda. This will load the next. There's the toggle behavior, the stepper. And here's a kind of one of the last fun scenarios I want to talk about. Is there's this idea of asynchronous behaviors not being able to happen until other things happen. So, for example, I cannot click on this button until that timer is done. I'm trying to click really loud. You can't. Well, I could search for it on Google or something, but that button is prevented until that timer is done. Again, think for a second what you'd have to do inside of your own library to only activate a button when a timer is done, and then when you click on that button, re-enable it. And then when I click this dismiss, now I can't click on this button anymore. And that's all wired up through this alarm concept, this alarm abstract that you can throw up to the heavens, pass in whatever, throw some props up to it, and it'll handle it all for you. All right, so again, this is React Streams. If you want to have a go at it, the source code is only 40 lines of code. I almost felt guilty publishing that small amount of code in NPM, but it felt like it just broke through that barrier of minimum viable NPM product. So feel free to go play with it. I did run it by the React core team to make sure it's keeping up with all the latest asynchronous behaviors that they're going to implement on the server-side rendering and all that. So there you go. That's React, that's RxJS, and that's those abstract concepts of alarms and steppers and toggles and AJAX and everything you'll ever need to build the best application you'd ever want to build. Thank you.